Now, I remember working as a floorman for the dear old Jack Lynn, rest his soul, in the betting rings of the West Country. You and a gaggle of fairly sharp fellas being the scourge of the ring, including the chap we used to call Deaf Paul. What was going on back in those days?
Well, I met Paul. There's another person I met on the train. I used to meet people on trains, and now I seem to be travelling around on my own a lot of the time. He's a punter from the West Country. He's moved to the West Country. He lived in Brighton when I first knew him, and a very, very dedicated follower of formal. He lives in Taunton now. He hardly ever goes racing now, but he still has a punt. And he and I sort of hit it off, and we used to think along the same lines, really. So we shared ideas and threw them up in the air. Quite often, because I was based in London, I'd be going to different meetings from him, but we would bump into each other down in the West Country, and we had a lot of laughs and a lot of success together over the years. But I wouldn't say he's retired now, but he doesn't come racing.
And there's several people you mentioned in other research I did. One of them I know has recently passed away, Racing Raymond.
Yeah.
He was a good friend. He was a bookmaker and a colourful character I knew of. You say something about him?
Racing Raymond, a very great friend of mine. I didn't meet him on the train, but I met him at the races all back in the 80s. And again, I mean, he had very strong ideas of how to be able to be a bookmaker, very old-fashioned in many ways, but somehow we hit it off, and he had a love of food and drink, and so do I. And poor Raymond, he keeled over on Boxing Day the year before last, and he lived to be 75. Considering his lifestyle, that was probably more than he could have expected. But he was a great character, a racecourse character, and he was an artist on the stool. I'm sure you'd agree, Simon. You'd have seen him in action on the Daily Double or on the forecast, and he had a lot to say. And I remember ringing him up one day and saying, "Raymond, we've got to back this horse for the Grand National." He said, "Oh, what price is it?" I said, "It's 100 to 1. He said, "Oh, 100 to 1. I've never met a 100 to 1 winner." This was Slim Pickens, who actually finished third, so he still hadn't backed the 100 to 1 winner. But the year before he died, we backed the Oaks winner at 100 to 1 together, and that was a 100 to 1 winner he backed. And he rushed to the winner's enclosure afterwards, shouting his old phrase, "Should have been favourite, should have been favourite." And of course, all the people who backed the favourite, ridden by Ryan Moore, that got beaten a short head, were a bit perplexed by this, including, I might say, by the connections of the horse. But that was Raymond. He was a great character.
There's a couple of other characters. What I do remember, Dodger McCartney's another one.
Yeah, well, Dodger sadly was killed in a car crash some years ago, travelling between two race courses. It actually wasn't that far from here, I believe, and he was killed in a head-on collision. And the man who was driving the other car was convicted of causing death by dangerous driving and served a prison sentence as a result. It was an absolute tragedy. And Dodger had himself been in remission from throat cancer, so he was kind of felt he was living on borrowed time. But he was a fixture in the betting rings when I was growing up, and everyone wanted to know what Dodger had backed, and he loved it. He used to milk it a little bit. He had his ups and downs, but he was a survivor and a great character.
Another one, Johnny Lights.
Johnny Lights, one of the fearless punters I was talking about earlier, who, for him, money was just a commodity. He used to bet on football quite heavily as well. He had a ticket agency business that probably helped him when times were hard, but loved an odds-on shot, but he was as hard as nails and would put as much as he could on horses. And he had a long-running friendship with the big bookmaker Dudley Roberts, and they jousted in the ring a lot.
Some characters. Jimmy the Wig is one I didn't know about.
Jimmy Rogers, he was Jimmy the Wig because he used to wear a wig, and he professed to be a football agent as well in the early days of football agency. But he used to duck and dive at the races, on the trains, and play cards. I remember one day there was a clerk at William Hill's called Lawrence Stone, who was a bit sharp at the cards, and Lawrence really gave Jimmy the Wig a bad time going to Folkestone one day and in the card school. I used to stand and sit and watch on the other side of the aisle, watch these guys playing cards. I never wanted to get involved. I felt they all had far too much experience for me, and that day poor old Jimmy came off the worst.
Tick Up Stan's another one.
Yeah, Tick Up Stan's, he died a couple of years ago. Tick Up Stan, he was a remarkable man because he used to be completely drunk every day of his life, and Tick Up Stan would be drinking all day and trying to find a punter to tell them the horse was going to win or a dog was going to win, because he used to go to the horses in the afternoon, and then Wimbledon in the evening. And old Stan used to he was one of the old school spivs, really, is how you could describe Stan. He'd stand outside selling marked race cards in the car park. One of the last of a dying breed, I think. But how he managed to stand up at the end of the day and get to the dog racing when he'd been drinking all day was remarkable.
And one I have heard about, Johnny Rath.
Johnny the Rath, he'd been a gunner, I believe, in the war, and that's where he got his nickname from, the RAF. And Johnny was another man who liked to drink, and he used to put on for people. He was a commission agent, if you like, I believe. But he was another character, and he had another sideline. He always used to have something to sell from his outings to Oxford Street, let's say. So he would, I've got some lovely cashmeres here, son. I've got some lovely cashmeres. He'd always be selling something, John, if he wasn't in the bar having a large scotch.
Tony the Hat.
Tony the Hat was a guy from Croydon who went racing with his brother, who didn't wear a hat, so he wasn't called the Hat. His nephews still go racing. They love their jump racing, but Tony was a great character. Not a big punter, but a big character. He always wore a hat, and he looked a bit like the Pope.
Bob the Dog.
Bob the Dog was another similar character to Johnny the Rath. Always had some knocked off gear he wanted to get rid of, and people would ask him to get the Timeform manual every year when it came out, and he never managed to get it because Timeform were a bit clever. They put it in a separate box for display, so he wasn't able to nick it. I don't know whether these sort of characters still frequent the races, people who shoplifters effectively, but there were one or two of them about, like Bob the Dog.
I was going to ask you that. Are there any other characters that still exist, that still come?
Yeah, there's a few. One of the lads who came up today, a guy called Roger, he's a big fan of yours. He's always at the races, and he often goes to Lingfield and onto Kempton on the train. And yeah, there's a few of us about still, a few who travel around from racecourse to racecourse, but not as many as the past when you could fill a carriage with them.
So that's slightly sad. No, as a footnote, what would be the best bit of advice you would give for anybody who's 19, 18, wants to get into this game, just despite all the negativity?
I think you've got to know whether you're any good at it first. I mean, I was a terrible mug punter when I first went racing and I first went to the dogs, but gradually I learned bad habits. I learned how to get out of bad habits, and I think in the end you've got to have some sort of ability for backing a winner. The best thing I could say is do something different, because if you're doing the same as everybody else, you're only going to come up with the same favourite that everybody else has gone for. If you've got an angle that you can justify or you can discover, that's the best way. And if you have got something different to offer, then you're going to be more likely to be successful than not.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Eddie.